I'm going to create the complete 10,000-word story based on the outline following all your requirements. I'll write in plain text, avoiding italics, special characters, and ensuring it's formatted as a voiceover script. My name is Skylar Williams, 34 years old, an art teacher from Boston. I sit here in this cold hospital room, feeling the weight of my world crashing down. The words still echo in my ears, cutting deeper than any physical pain. Even if you die, I won't save you. My father said, his voice as cold as ice. How could the man who raised me refuse to help when I needed a kidney transplant that could save my life? In that moment, the mask fell away and I saw his true face for the first time. If you want to know how the story unfolds, please like and subscribe, and let me know in the comments where you're watching from. I grew up in a middle-class neighborhood in Boston, in a house that from the outside looked picture perfect. My father, Jackson Williams, built his career as a financial advisor. He wore tailored suits, drove luxury cars, and had the kind of confidence that commanded respect wherever he went. To others, he was the definition of success, but at home, his perfectionism cast a long shadow. My mother, Diane, was his opposite in many ways. She taught elementary school, had a warm laugh that filled our home, and saw beauty in things my father considered frivolous. She encouraged my love for art from the moment I could hold a crayon. I remember sitting at our kitchen table for hours drawing while she prepared dinner, telling me stories about famous artists who changed the world with their vision. Art helps us see the world differently, Skylar, she would say. It reminds us there's more to life than numbers on a balance sheet. My father would overhear these conversations and shake his head. Drawing pretty pictures is a nice hobby, but it won't secure your future, he would counter. This became a familiar tension in our household, these two opposing visions for what made a life worthwhile. Everything changed when I was 15. Mum was diagnosed with aggressive breast cancer. The months that followed were a blur of hospital visits, the smell of antiseptic, and watching my beautiful mother fade away. She fought hard, but within 8 months, she was gone. The day after her funeral, I found my father in his office surrounded by paperwork. His eyes were dry, his posture rigid. "Life goes on, Skylar," he said when he noticed me watching him. "The sooner you accept that, the better." But for me, acceptance wasn't so simple. I retreated into my art-filling sketchbooks, with drawings of my mother trying to preserve her memory on paper, since I could no longer hold her. When my father saw these drawings, he seemed uncomfortable, almost angry. "This isn't healthy," he said, closing my sketchbook. "You need to focus on your future, not dwell in the past." From that point forward, an emotional distance grew between us. It was as if, when we lost my mother, my father decided emotions were a liability he could no longer afford. He became even more focused on appearance, success, and financial security. My younger brother Troy handled things differently. 3 years younger than me, he seemed to instinctively understand what our father wanted. He joined the right clubs, played the right sports, and talked about following our father into finance. Dad beamed with pride at Troy's baseball games and academic achievements, while my art contest wins received brief nods of acknowledgement. "Your brother understands what it takes to succeed in this world," Dad would say, not realizing how each comparison drove the wedge between us deeper. Despite my father's disapproval, I applied to art school. When my acceptance letter came with a partial scholarship, I expected at least grudging support. Instead, my father refused to contribute financially. "If you insist on pursuing this path, you'll do it on your own," he said. "I won't throw good money after bad decisions." So I worked 2 jobs while attending classes, took out student loans, and graduated with honors 4 years later. My father and Troy attended my graduation ceremony, but my father's congratulations felt perfunctory, as if he was still waiting for me to fail, so I would admit he had been right all along. After graduation, I built a modest life for myself. I found a job teaching art at a community centre and eventually at a public high school. My apartment was small but filled with colour and light. My salary didn't compare to what I might have earned in finance, but I loved inspiring young artists and seeing their faces light up when they created something they were proud of. I tried to maintain a relationship with my father, visiting for obligatory holiday dinners, where he would inevitably ask about my retirement planning or suggest career alternatives. Troy had followed the expected path, working at a prestigious financial firm and living in a luxury condo our father helped him purchase. The contrast between our lives was stark and frequently highlighted. Things began to change 3 years ago when I met Marcus. He was a nurse at the hospital where I was volunteering teaching art to children in the pediatric ward. I noticed him watching my class one day, smiling as I helped a young cancer patient mix colours for her self-portrait. "You have a gift," he told me afterward. "You make them forget where they are for a while." Marcus was kind, thoughtful, and passionate about helping others. Unlike my father, he valued my work and understood why I chose it. We fell in love quickly, moving in together after a year. For the first time since losing my mother, I felt like I was building a family of my own, one based on mutual respect and understanding. My father was less than enthusiastic when I introduced Marcus at Thanksgiving dinner. He questioned Marcus about his career prospects, his retirement plan, his student loan debt. I was mortified, but Marcus handled it with grace. "I may not be wealthy, sir," Marcus said, "but I help people heal every day, and that feels like success to me." My father merely nodded, but I could tell he had already made his judgment. Later, he pulled me aside. "You could have chosen someone with more ambition, Skylar," he said. "You're limiting yourself again." I left that night, wondering if my father would ever see value in the life I had chosen, or if his disappointment would always be the backdrop to our relationship. Little did I know that this question would soon be answered in the most painful way possible. It started with fatigue. Teaching art requires energy moving around the classroom, demonstrating techniques, and staying enthusiastic even when students get discouraged. But suddenly, I found myself exhausted by mid-morning, needing to sit down while my students worked. "You should see a doctor," Marcus suggested after I came home and fell asleep on the couch before dinner for the third time that week. "This isn't like you." I brushed off his concern. "It's just end of semester stress. I'll be fine once summer break starts." But then, the pain began, a dull ache in my lower back that eventually became sharp and insistent. I started taking over-the-counter pain relievers, like candy, hiding the extent of my discomfort from Marcus. As a nurse, he would insist on medical attention, and the truth was, I was afraid. Not just of what might be wrong, but of the cost. My position as an art teacher at the high school was technically part-time, despite the full-time hours I put in. This arrangement saved the school district money, but meant I didn't qualify for their comprehensive health insurance. The private insurance I could afford had a high deductible and limited coverage. One night, Marcus found me curled up on the bathroom floor, the pain so intense I couldn't stand up straight. My skin had taken on a yellowish tinge, and I couldn't hide it anymore. "We're going to the emergency room," he said, his voice firm but frightened. "This isn't optional, Skylar." The emergency room was bright and chaotic. I remember fragments of that night, the cold stethoscope against my back, the pinch of the IV needle, the concerned expressions as doctors reviewed my blood work. By morning, the verdict was in, and it was worse than I had feared. "You're in acute kidney failure," the nephrologist, Dr. Landry, explained. "Your creatinine levels are dangerously high, and ultrasound shows significant damage to both kidneys." More tests followed, each adding pieces to a frightening puzzle. I had a rare form of aggressive glomerulonephritis, an autoimmune condition where my body was attacking my kidneys. The damage was extensive and irreversible. "Without immediate intervention, you're looking at complete kidney failure within weeks," Dr. Landry explained. "You need dialysis right away, but given your age and the aggressive nature of your condition, a transplant is the best long-term solution." Marcus held my hand as the doctor explained the process. The waiting list for deceased donor kidneys that could take years, the possibility of finding a living donor who matched. My mind was spinning, trying to process this new reality when the conversation turned to finances. "Even with insurance, you're looking at significant out-of-pocket costs," the financial counselor explained gently. "The surgery alone can run upwards of $300,000, and that doesn't include post-operative care, anti-rejection medications you'll need for life." The numbers blurred together, impossibly large. My teacher's salary and modest savings wouldn't make a dent. Marcus had some savings, but nowhere near enough. The financial counselor mentioned payment plans, assistance programs, fundraising options, but all I could think was that I was 34 and facing a choice between financial ruin or death. "We'll figure this out," Marcus promised that night as I lay in the hospital bed hooked up to a dialysis machine for the first time. "There are options." But as days passed and I researched those options, they seemed increasingly limited. I reached out to extended family, distant cousins, my mother's sister in California. Everyone expressed sympathy, but no one had the resources to help in any meaningful way. I thought about my father sitting in his large house in Beacon Hill with his investment portfolio and vacation properties. I hadn't asked him for anything since he refused to help with art school. The thought of calling him now admitting I needed help felt like swallowing broken glass. But as my condition worsened and the financial pressure mounted, I realized I had no choice. "Are you sure about this?" Marcus asked as I picked up my phone. After everything he said about your choices. He's still my father, I said, trying to convince myself as much as Marcus. And I'm his daughter. That has to count for something, right? My hands trembled as I dialed his number. It rang 4 times and I almost hung up, but then his familiar voice answered, formal and distant as ever. This is Jackson Williams. I took a deep breath and jumped off the cliff. Dad, it's Skylar. I need to talk to you about something important. Skylar. My father said, his voice instantly shifting to that slightly impatient tone I knew too well. This is unexpected. I clutched the phone tighter, feeling like a child again, seeking approval that never came. The hospital room seemed to shrink around me as I gathered my courage. Dad, I wouldn't call if it wasn't important. I began, my voice smaller than I intended. I'm in the hospital. I've been diagnosed with kidney failure. It's serious. A pause. I see. And what do the doctors recommend? No questions about how I was feeling, if I was scared, or what had happened. Just straight to the practical matter at hand. Typical. I need a transplant, I explained, trying to keep my voice steady. My kidneys are failing and dialysis is only a temporary solution. The problem is the cost. Even with my insurance, we're talking about hundreds of thousands of dollars. Another pause, longer this time. I could almost picture him sitting at his mahogany desk, expression, calculating as if I were a client presenting a questionable investment opportunity. And you're calling because you need money, he stated flatly. Yes, I admitted, hating how it sounded, how it felt. I need help. I've tried everything else. I'm working with the hospital financial department, looking into assistance programs. But there's still an enormous gap, and What about your boyfriend, the nurse? Surely he understands the healthcare system better than most. Has he not helped you navigate this? The implied criticism made my chest tighten. Marcus has been incredible, Dad. He's done everything possible, but we don't have the kind of money this requires. Nobody I know does, except me, he finished. I see. What followed was a series of pointed questions about my condition, my insurance coverage, why I hadn't opted for better coverage, whether I had explored every possible financial assistance program. Each question felt like an indictment of my life choices. This is exactly what I warned you about, Skylar, he said eventually, his voice taking on that lecture tone I dreaded. Financial security isn't just about day-to-day comfort. It's about being prepared for crises like this. If you had followed the career path I suggested— Dad, please, I interrupted, tears welling up. I know you disagree with my choices, but right now I'm facing a life-threatening situation. Can we put that aside just for now? The silence that followed was heavy. Finally, he sighed. I'll need to understand exactly what we're talking about here. The full situation, the cost, the prognosis. I can't make any decisions without complete information. It wasn't a yes, but it wasn't a no either. A tiny spark of hope flickered to life. Of course, I said quickly. The doctors can explain everything much better than I can. Could you come to the hospital, meet with my nephrologist? Another pause. Fine, I'll rearrange some meetings. I can be there tomorrow afternoon. Text me the details. Thank you, Dad. Really, Don't thank me yet, Skylar. I haven't agreed to anything. I'm simply gathering information. After we hung up, I collapsed back against the pillows, emotionally drained. Marcus returned with coffee and immediately noticed my expression. You called him. I nodded. He's coming tomorrow. He didn't promise anything, but he's coming. Marcus sat beside me, taking my hand. That's something then. He'll help, I said, trying to convince myself. He has to. He's my father. The next day, I was a bundle of nerves. I asked the nurses to help me look presentable, embarrassed by how much it mattered to me. I put on my own clothes instead of the hospital gown. Applied a touch of makeup to hide my pallor, and even asked Marcus to bring my sketchbook so the room would look less sterile, more like me. You don't need to impress him, Skylar, Marcus said gently, watching me fuss with my hair. You're fighting for your life. That should be enough. You don't know my father, I replied, smoothing non-existent wrinkles from my blanket. Appearance matters. Strength matters. He despises weakness. The afternoon crawled by. Every time footsteps passed my door, I tensed, then deflated when they continued down the hall. Dr. Landry stopped by to confirm he'd be available to speak with my father, reviewing my case files and nodding reassuringly. At 3:42 p.m., I heard familiar voices in the corridor. My father's authoritative tone, and surprisingly, my brother Troy's lighter one. I hadn't expected Troy to come. We weren't close, but we weren't enemies either, existing in separate orbits around our father's son. They appeared in my doorway, my father impeccable in a charcoal suit that probably cost more than 3 months of my salary, Troy beside him in designer casual wear, looking uncomfortable but concerned. "Skylar," my father said, his eyes quickly scanning the room, taking in the medical equipment, the IV stand, my attempt at normalcy with the sketchbook open on the side table. His gaze finally landed on me, and I saw him register the changes in my appearance. The weight loss, the sallow skin, the shadows under my eyes. Something flickered across his face too quickly to identify. "Hi, Dad," I said, hating the tremor in my voice. "Thanks for coming. Troy, I didn't expect you." Troy stepped forward awkwardly, patting my blanket-covered foot. "Hey, sis. Dad told me what's going on. Thought I should be here too. You hanging in there? Yeah." Before I could answer, my father cut in. "You look unwell. Worse than I expected. Is your doctor available? I'd like to speak with him immediately." No hug, no expression of concern or affection. Just business as usual. "Dr. Landry said he'd come when you arrived. I can have the nurse call him." I offered, reaching for the call button. My father nodded, already pulling out his phone to check messages. Troy gave me an apologetic look and moved to the window, gazing out at the hospital parking lot. "So," my father said without looking up from his phone, "I assume there are treatment options besides this transplant, alternatives that might be more financially reasonable." And just like that, the small hope I'd been nurturing began to wither. Dr. Landry arrived within minutes, clipboard in hand, and a professional smile that faltered slightly when he sensed the tension in the room. After introductions, he launched into an explanation of my condition using medical terminology that had become all too familiar to me over the past weeks. My father inspected the hospital room with visible disapproval eyes lingering on the peeling paint in one corner, the outdated television mounted on the wall. I could almost hear his thoughts about how a private room in a better hospital would look. His attention snapped back to Dr. Landry when the conversation turned to costs. "As you can see from these test results, Mr. Williams, your daughter's kidney function is declining rapidly despite dialysis," Dr. Landry explained, showing charts that mapped my deterioration in neat clinical lines. "A transplant is not just recommended, it's essential for her long-term survival." "And the total cost for this procedure?" My father asked, his voice crisp and businesslike, as if inquiring about a home renovation rather than his daughter's life. Dr. Landry glanced at me before answering. "With Ms. Williams' current insurance coverage, she's looking at approximately $280,000 out of pocket, including the surgery, hospitalization, and the first year of anti-rejection medications. After that, ongoing medication costs will run about $30,000 annually." My father's eyebrows raised slightly. "And these medications must be taken indefinitely." "For the rest of her life, yes," Dr. Landry confirmed. "Are there any alternatives to a transplant, something less invasive, Doctor?" Landry shook his head. "She can continue dialysis, but given the aggressive nature of her condition and her age, that's a short-term solution. Quality of life on permanent dialysis is significantly reduced, and eventually it won't be enough." "I see." My father's voice was flat, unreadable. He turned to me. "And you've explored all possible financial assistance, insurance appeals, medical grants?" "Yes, Dad," I said, fighting to keep my voice steady. "Marcus and I have talked to financial counselors, applied for everything available. The hospital can put me on a payment plan, but we're still talking about a down payment of at least $50,000 that I don't have." Troy shifted uncomfortably by the window, eyes darting between our father and me. He hadn't spoken since Dr. Landry entered, but I could see the conflict on his face. "There's also the option of living donation," Dr. Landry added. "If a compatible donor can be found among family or friends, that would expedite the process significantly." My father stiffened. "That's not an option I'm willing to consider at my age." "I wasn't suggesting you specifically, Mr. Williams," Dr. Landry clarified. "We would screen any willing family members or friends for compatibility." "I could get tested," Troy offered, suddenly his voice quiet but clear. Our father turned to him sharply. "Absolutely not. I won't have both my children putting their health at risk." The irony of his concern for Troy's health while dismissing mine wasn't lost on me. I blinked back tears, determined not to show weakness. "Dad, I've tried everything else," I said, hating the pleading note in my voice. "I've saved what I could on a teacher's salary, but it's nowhere near enough. I need help with the down payment at minimum. Without it, they won't even schedule the surgery." My father walked to the window, hands clasped behind his back, looking out at the city skyline. The silence stretched painfully. Finally he turned, his expression hard and resolved. "Even if you die, I won't save you. The words hung in the air cold and final. I felt as if I'd been slapped. "What?" I whispered, certain I'd misheard. "You made your choices, Skylar." He continued, his voice eerily calm. "You chose a career that couldn't support you in crisis. You chose inadequate insurance. You chose a partner with equally limited resources. These choices have consequences." Dr. Landry looked stunned. "Mr. Williams, perhaps you don't fully understand the severity." "I understand perfectly, Doctor," my father interrupted. "My daughter has spent her life ignoring my guidance about financial security. Now she faces the consequences of those decisions and expects me to bail her out." Tears burned in my eyes, but shock kept them from falling. "Dad, this is my life we're talking about. And it's my money we're talking about," he countered. "Money I earned by making responsible choices. Money that shouldn't be wasted because you refused to do the same." Troy stepped forward. "Dad, this is extreme. We're talking about Skylar's life." My father turned to him. "Stay out of this, Troy. This isn't your concern." "She's my sister," Troy protested, though his voice wavered. "And I'm paying for your MBA and your new car," our father reminded him sharply. "Your third car, I might add, while your sister can't even pay her medical bills. Do you see the difference in your situations? That's the result of your choices versus hers." The revelation that my father was buying Troy a third luxury car while refusing to help save my life was the final blow. Something broke inside me, a dam of emotions I'd held back for years. "Get out," I whispered, then louder. "Get out." Dr. Landry placed a steadying hand on my shoulder. "Ms. Williams, your blood pressure." But I couldn't stop. Years of seeking approval, of swallowing hurt, of making excuses for my father's emotional distance exploded at once. "You've always made it clear you thought my choices were worthless," I said, voice shaking. "But I never thought you'd actually let me die to prove your point. What kind of father are you?" For a moment, something like doubt flickered across my father's face, quickly replaced by the stony resolve I knew too well. "The kind who taught his children about consequences," he said coldly. "Perhaps this will be your final lesson." He turned to leave, pausing at the door. "Come, Troy, we're done here." Troy hesitated, looking at me with confusion and distress. "Skylar, Now, Troy," our father commanded. With one last pained glance at me, Troy followed him out. I collapsed back against the pillows, sobs tearing through me with such force that alarms on my monitors began to sound. Dr. Landry called for a nurse, speaking in urgent medical shorthand about my blood pressure and heart rate. Through the haze of my breakdown, I was vaguely aware of Marcus rushing in, having arrived for his visit to find me in crisis. He gathered me in his arms, holding me as I shook with the force of my sobs. "He won't help," I managed between gasps. "He said he'd let me die. My own father." Marcus held me tighter, his own tears falling into my hair. "We'll figure something out, Sky. I promise. We'll find a way without him." But in that moment, lying in a hospital bed with failing kidneys and a father who had just delivered what felt like a death sentence, I couldn't imagine what way forward could possibly exist. The days following my father's rejection were the darkest of my life. I spiraled into a depression that rivaled what I'd felt after losing my mother. The difference was that my mother had been taken from me by disease, something beyond anyone's control. My father had looked me in the eye and chosen to abandon me. Marcus took emergency family leave from the hospital to be with me. I argued weakly that we couldn't afford for him to miss work, but he was adamant. "Money doesn't matter if you give up," he said, arranging his clothes in the small closet of my hospital room, making it clear he wasn't leaving my side. My physical condition deteriorated alongside my mental state. Dialysis kept me alive, but the stress and emotional trauma weren't helping my overall health. Dr. Landry monitored me with increasing concern, adjusting medications and dialysis schedules. But the underlying truth remained unchanged. Without a transplant, my future was bleak. "We need to keep fighting," Marcus would say each morning, helping me sit up, brush my teeth, holding a mirror as I half-heartedly combed my thinning hair. "Your father isn't the only option." I wanted to believe him, but hope felt like a luxury I could no longer afford. I stopped sketching, stopped looking at my phone, stopped engaging with the nurses. Food lost its taste, sleep came in restless bursts, punctuated by nightmares. I would wake, gasping, hearing my father's words echo in my mind, "Even if you die, I won't save you." On the 5th day after my father's visit, something unexpected happened. Eliza, a former student who had graduated 3 years earlier and gone on to become a successful graphic designer, appeared in my doorway holding a bouquet of sunflowers. "Ms. Williams," she said tentatively, taking in my diminished appearance with poorly concealed shock. The nurses said I could visit for a few minutes. Eliza, I managed, genuinely surprised. How did you know I was here? She placed the flowers on my bedside table and perched on the edge of the visitor's chair. I came by the community centre for the summer art program. They said you were on medical leave. One of the other teachers mentioned you were here. She hesitated. I hope it's okay that I came. For the first time in days, I felt something other than despair, a flicker of warmth at this evidence that I had made enough of an impact on someone's life that they would seek me out. It's good to see you, I said, meaning it. Your work at Sullivan & Partners has been getting attention. I saw your logo design for that tech startup in the Design Quarterly. Eliza beamed. You've been following my career. Of course. You were one of my most talented students. We talked for a while about her work, her recent engagement, the design community in Boston. It was the longest conversation I'd had about anything other than my illness in weeks. When Marcus returned with coffee, he seemed delighted to find me engaged and almost animated. Before Eliza left, she asked the question I'd been dreading. Ms. Williams? What exactly is wrong? Is there anything I can do to help? I hesitated, embarrassed to admit my situation, but Marcus gave me an encouraging nod. I have kidney failure, I explained. I need a transplant, but there are financial obstacles. Insurance doesn't cover everything, and it's complicated. Eliza's eyes widened. That's terrible. How much do you need? I winced at the directness of the question. It's a lot, Eliza, more than anyone could reasonably help with. She was quiet for a moment, then pulled out her phone. Can I take a picture with you? For old time's sake. The request seemed odd given the circumstances, but I agreed. Marcus helped me sit up a bit straighter as Eliza took a selfie with me, careful to keep the medical equipment out of frame. I'm going to help somehow, she promised as she left. You changed my life, Ms. Williams. I wouldn't be where I am without you believing in me when no one else did. Dessay, I assumed her words were kind but empty, the sort of thing people say when faced with someone else's insurmountable problems. I was wrong. 2 days later, a nurse brought in her tablet during my dialysis session. You might want to see this, she said, pulling up a social media page. It was Eliza's account, and she had shared our photo alongside a lengthy post about how I had mentored her, encouraged her when her parents wanted her to pursue business instead of art, and helped her build a portfolio that earned her a scholarship. She explained my current situation without using my name, respecting my privacy, while making it clear that the art teacher who had changed her trajectory was now fighting for her life. If you've ever had a teacher who believed in you when no one else did, who saw your potential and nurtured it, please share this post, she had written. And if you're in a position to help financially, even in a small way, the link to the fundraiser is in my bio. The post had thousands of shares already. I scrolled with trembling fingers to the fundraiser link. The goal was set ambitiously at $100,000. The current total after just 28 hours was already approaching $15,000. This is incredible, Marcus breathed, looking over my shoulder. People care, Skylar. They want to help. More surprises followed. Later that day, the director of the local gallery, where I'd occasionally exhibited my work, called. He had seen Eliza's post and wanted to organise a benefit show. We'll feature your work, obviously, he explained, but I've already had calls from a dozen artists who want to contribute pieces. All proceeds would go toward your medical fund. Former students began to visit, first a trickle, then a steady stream. Many brought small gifts, homemade cards, art supplies, books to pass the time. Some shared stories about how my encouragement had kept them going through difficult times. How my art room had been a safe haven when they felt lost or alone. My colleagues from the high school and community centre organised a meal train for Marcus, ensuring he was fed while maintaining his vigil at my bedside. One of the science teachers started a separate fundraiser specifically among school staff and parents. The outpouring of support was overwhelming. For someone who had grown up feeling that my value was measured by my financial success or lack thereof, seeing people rally around me based purely on the impact I'd had through teaching and kindness was transformative. See, Marcus would say each time a new donation came in or another visitor left. This is your real worth, Sky. This is what matters. I began to feel a spark of hope again, fragile but persistent. The fundraiser total climbed steadily, passing $30,000, then $40,000. It wasn't enough yet, but the trajectory was promising. Maybe, just maybe, this community effort could succeed where my own father had failed me. Then came the call that changed everything again. I was sketching for the first time in weeks a rough portrait of Marcus sleeping in the uncomfortable hospital chair when my phone rang. The number belonged to my father's executive assistant, Patricia. "Skylar," she said, when I answered, her voice oddly hesitant. "Your father has asked me to set up a meeting with you tomorrow at the hospital." I nearly dropped the phone. Why, he made his position perfectly clear. Patricia lowered her voice. "There's been a development. I can't say more over the phone, but he insists on seeing you as soon as possible. Shall I tell him you'll meet with him at 10 a.m? I looked at Marcus, who had woken and was watching me with concern. I covered the phone. "My father wants to meet tomorrow. His assistant won't say why." Marcus's expression hardened. "After what he said, do you really want to put yourself through that again?" I thought about it, torn between self-protection and desperate hope. What if he had changed his mind? "Tell him I'll see him," I told Patricia, ignoring Marcus's frown. "But he comes alone, not with Troy, not with his lawyers, just him." After hanging up, I explained my decision to Marcus. "I need to know what he wants. Maybe he's reconsidered. And maybe he wants to twist the knife deeper," Marcus countered. "I don't trust him, Sky." "Neither do I admitted. "But I need to know what this is about, if there's any chance he's changed his mind." Marcus sighed, taking my hand. "I'll be right outside the door the whole time. If he upsets you, I'm coming in whether you want me to or not." I squeezed his hand, grateful for his protective instinct, but determined to face my father on my own terms. Deal. That night, I barely slept, my mind racing with possibilities. Had my father had a change of heart? Was he going to help after all? Or was this some new cruelty, some final lecture about my life choices as my health declined? By morning, I had steeled myself for any outcome. Whatever my father's purpose in this meeting, I would face it with the dignity he had always demanded but rarely acknowledged in me. At precisely 10 a.m. the next day, my father strode into my hospital room like he was entering a boardroom. His expression was thunderous, a stark contrast to the controlled demeanor he'd shown during his last visit. Something had changed, and not in the way I had cautiously hoped. "Close the door," he demanded without greeting. I raised an eyebrow, channeling a confidence I didn't entirely feel. "Hello to you too, Dad." He shut the door with more force than necessary, then turned to face me. "Would you care to explain why my secretary just informed me that you've gone public with our private family business?" For a moment, I was genuinely confused. "What are you talking about?" "Don't play innocent, Skylar. I just saw a news segment about a local art teacher with kidney failure whose wealthy father refused to help her. They didn't use our names, but anyone who knows us would recognize the situation. Did you think I wouldn't find out about this publicity stunt?" Understanding dawned. The fundraiser, Eliza's post, the gallery benefit. Word had spread further than I realized. "I didn't go to the media," I said truthfully. "Former students and colleagues organized a fundraiser when they learned about my situation. I didn't ask them to." "But you didn't stop them either," he accused. "Now I'm getting calls from business associates asking if I'm the heartless father in the story. Do you have any idea how this looks?" I stared at him in disbelief. My life was hanging in the balance, and his primary concern was his reputation. "How it looks," I repeated, my voice rising despite my best efforts to stay calm. "I'm fighting for my life, Dad. You told me you would let me die rather than help me. What exactly did you expect me to do? Just accept that and quietly disappear?" "I expected you to handle this with dignity and privacy, not turn it into a public spectacle that damages my standing in the community," he snapped. "Your standing?" My laugh was hollow. "That's what you're worried about. Not the fact that your daughter needs a life-saving procedure you could easily afford to help with." My father paced the small room, agitation evident in every movement. "You've always been manipulative, Skylar. Just like your mother, using emotions to get what you want instead of earning it." The comparison to my mother, clearly meant as an insult, felt like a compliment. "Thank you," I said quietly. "Mum was the best person I've ever known. If I'm anything like her, I'm proud of that." He stopped pacing to glare at me. "Your mother was irresponsible with money and filled your head with impractical notions about following your passion. Look where that got you." "It got me a life I loved until I got sick," I countered. "It got me students who care enough to fight for me when my own father won't. It got me genuine relationships based on more than financial transactions. And yet here you are needing money you don't have," he said coldly. "Yes, here I am," I agreed. Sick through no fault of my own, facing a healthcare system that bankrupts people for having the audacity to fall ill. Would my kidneys have failed if I'd become an investment banker instead of an art teacher? Would money in the bank have prevented this autoimmune disease? My father's jaw tightened. You would have had better insurance. Savings to cover emergencies. Maybe, I conceded. Or maybe I would have been just as sick, but completely alone, because I'd spent my life chasing money instead of building meaningful relationships. At least now I know where I stand with you. Something shifted in my father's expression, a calculation happening behind his eyes. He straightened his tie and adopted a more business-like tone. I didn't come here to argue, Skylar. I came to offer a solution that would benefit us both. I tensed, immediately suspicious. What kind of solution? I'll pay for your transplant, he said. Cover all costs, including lifetime medications. For a split second, hope flared until he continued. In exchange, you'll sign an agreement never to speak publicly about this situation again. You'll issue a statement clarifying that the fundraiser was based on a misunderstanding, and you'll decline all donations received so far. The hope crashed as quickly as it had risen. You want me to lie and reject help from people who genuinely care about me, just to protect your reputation. I want to resolve this situation efficiently, he corrected. You get the medical care you need. I maintain my privacy and professional standing. Everyone wins. I shook my head slowly. That's not a solution, Dad. That's a bribe to cover up your moral failure. His face hardened. Don't be dramatic, Skylar. This is a practical business arrangement. My life isn't a business arrangement, I shouted, surprising even myself with the force of my anger. God, do you even hear yourself? Do you realize what you're admitting? You could have helped me all along. You just didn't want to unless it benefited you too. My raised voice must have alarmed Marcus because the door opened and he stepped halfway in, eyes darting between us. Everything okay in here? We're fine, my father said dismissively. This is a private conversation. Skylar. Marcus looked to me for confirmation. I was about to reassure him when my father's phone rang. He checked the screen and frowned. I need to take this, he said, moving toward the door. Think about my offer, Skylar. It's the best you're going to get. As he stepped into the hallway to answer his call, the door didn't fully close behind him. His voice drifted back into the room, clear enough for me to hear every word. Troy, this isn't a good time. What do you mean you're at the safety deposit box? How did you even get access to... No, don't open anything. I'll be there in 20 minutes. Don't do anything until I arrive. The panic in my father's voice was unmistakable, completely unlike his usual controlled tone. He ended the call and re-entered my room, composure visibly shaken. We'll continue this discussion later, he said, already moving toward the door. I have an urgent matter to attend to. What's going on with Troy? I asked. Is everything okay? Nothing that concerns you, he replied curtly. Think about my offer. I'll expect your answer by tomorrow. After he left, Marcus sat beside me, taking my hand. What was that about? What offer? I explained my father's proposition, watching outrage bloom on Marcus's face. That's despicable, he said. He'd help, but only to shut you up and save face. Something's happening with Troy. I said, my mind still on the phone call I'd overheard. Something about a safety deposit box that has my father panicking. Marcus shrugged. Rich people problems. Probably some tax document he doesn't want Troy to see. But a nagging thought had taken root in my mind. My mother had always been organized, meticulous about certain things, despite my father's complaints about her financial sense. She had prepared for her death in ways that had impressed even my father, leaving detailed instructions about everything from her funeral preferences to which of her belongings should go to which family members. Marcus, I said slowly, what if there's something in that safety deposit box related to my mother, something my father doesn't want found? Before Marcus could respond, my phone buzzed with a text message. It was from Troy, which was unusual enough to make me open it immediately. Need to talk to you ASAP. Coming to hospital. Don't tell Dad. I showed the message to Marcus, whose eyebrows rose in surprise. Looks like we might get some answers sooner than later, he said. An hour later, Troy appeared in my doorway, breathless and agitated, clutching a large manila envelope. His eyes were red-rimmed and he looked like he hadn't slept. Troy, what's going on? I asked as he closed the door behind him. He approached my bed, hands trembling slightly as he held out the envelope. You need to see this, he said, voice unsteady. I found it in Mom's old safety deposit box. Dad never knew I had access to it. Mom gave me a key before she died, made me promise to check it on her birthday each year. I forgot last year with everything going on, but today. I took the envelope, confused by his obvious distress. Troy, what is this? Just open it, he urged. You'll understand. Inside was a thick legal document and a handwritten letter in my mother's familiar script. As I began to read the truth that would change everything unfolded before my eyes. The first page of the document was a trust agreement dated 2 years before my mother's death. The language was dense with legal terminology, but certain phrases jumped out immediately. Irrevocable educational and medical trust. Sole benefit of Skylar Diana Williams. Minimum distribution of $500,000 upon completion of higher education. Unlimited access for verified medical expenses. My hands trembled as I flipped through the pages, finding bank statements, showing an initial deposit of $1.2 million, with growth to nearly $1.8 million over the years since my mother's death. I don't understand, I whispered, looking up at Troy. How is this possible? Mum didn't have this kind of money. Troy sat heavily in the chair beside my bed. Apparently she did. The letter explains everything. I unfolded my mother's letter, her handwriting so achingly familiar it brought tears to my eyes before I'd read a single word. My dearest Skylar, it began. If you're reading this, it means Troy has fulfilled his promise to check the safety deposit box, and you have need of the funds I've set aside for you. I hope you never need to use this for medical emergencies, but I wanted to ensure you were protected. The letter explained that my mother had inherited a substantial sum from her grandmother, money she had kept separate from the family finances at the insistence of her own mother, who had warned her to maintain financial independence even in marriage. She had invested it carefully over the years, growing it with the help of a financial advisor who was not connected to my father. Your father and I disagree about many things, she wrote, but none more fundamental than how we measure the value of a life. He believes success is counted in dollars and professional achievements. I believe it's measured in kindness, creativity, and the positive impact we have on others. I've watched you grow into a compassionate, talented young woman, and I know you lean toward my philosophy rather than his. She went on to explain that she had created the trust specifically to support my education and any medical needs that might arise, with Troy named as a secondary trustee if anything happened to her. Jackson must never have access to these funds, she wrote firmly. The trust is structured to prevent him from controlling this money, as I fear he would redirect it according to his own values, rather than honouring my wishes for you. The final paragraphs brought fresh tears streaming down my face. Follow your heart, my darling girl. Create beauty in this world. Teach others to see as artists see. Know that your worth is not determined by your bank account, but by the light you bring to dark places. And know that no matter what I have provided for you in the ways that matter most. I looked up at Troy, vision blurred by tears. Did you know about this all along? He shook his head vehemently. No, I swear. Mum just told me to check the box each year on her birthday. I never knew what was in it until today. I only looked because... He hesitated. Because of my situation, I finished for him. Yeah, he ran a hand through his hair, looking miserable. When Dad refused to help you, it felt wrong. I couldn't understand how he could just... But then I remembered Mom's safety deposit box, and I thought maybe there might be some message from her that might help. I never expected this. Marcus, who had been silently reading over my shoulder, whistled low. Your mother was incredible. She saw this coming somehow. Not this specifically, I said, running my fingers over my mother's handwriting. But she knew Dad. She understood him in ways I never could. Troy leaned forward, expression urgent. Skylar, Dad knows I went to the box. He called while I was there. He's been managing this trust illegally since Mum died. He must have bribed someone at the bank to access it without proper authorization. That's why he panicked when I told him where I was. The implications hit me like a physical blow. He's been using my trust fund, the money that was meant for my education and medical care. Troy nodded grimly. The most recent statement shows regular withdrawals over the past 10 years. Large ones. The balance is down to about $600,000 now. That's still more than enough for the transplant, Marcus pointed out. But it should have been over $1 million more, I said, anger rising through my shock. He knew about this money when I asked for help with art school. He knew when I came to him about the transplant. He's been stealing from me for years. And from Mom, Troy added quietly. He betrayed her final wishes. I stared at the documents in my lap, emotions swirling too chaotically to name. Relief that my medical expenses could be covered. Rage at my father's deception. Grief for my mother, who had tried so hard to protect me even after her death. And beneath it all, a profound sense of vindication. My mother had valued my choices, had provided for me to follow my heart rather than my father's rigid expectations. "What do we do now?" I asked, looking between Troy and Marcus. Marcus squeezed my hand. "We get you the transplant you need. That's the first priority." "And my father?" "He's been stealing from this trust for years. That's illegal." Troy's expression hardened in a way I'd never seen before. "I think it's time Dad faced consequences for once in his life. I know a good lawyer from business school, one who isn't on Dad's payroll." "Are you sure?" I asked, knowing what this would mean for Troy's relationship with our father. "He'll cut you off completely." Troy looked at the letter in my hands, then back at me. "Mom protected you. Maybe it's time I did the same." Just then my phone rang. My father's name flashed on the screen. I showed it to Troy and Marcus. "What should I do?" I asked. Marcus's expression was grim. "I think you should answer. But first..." He pulled out his own phone and opened a recording app. If he admits anything, we should have it documented. I nodded, took a deep breath, and answered the call, putting it on speaker. "Dad," I said, struggling to keep my voice neutral. "Skylar, have you seen your brother?" He sounded agitated, none of his usual control evident. "He's not answering his phone." I looked at Troy, who shook his head slightly. "I haven't heard from him," I lied. "Listen carefully." My father said, his voice dropping to an urgent whisper. "If Troy contacts you, don't believe whatever he tells you. He's confused about some financial matters that don't concern either of you." "Financial matters," I repeated innocently. "Like my trust fund." There was a beat of silence. When my father spoke again, his voice had changed, becoming cautious, calculating. "What are you talking about?" "The trust fund Mum set up for my education and medical expenses. The one you've been stealing from for the past decade." Another silence, longer this time. "Who told you about that?" "Does it matter? I know, Dad. I know everything. The initial amount, the current balance, the regular withdrawals you've been making. I have all the documentation right in front of me." "Skylar, you don't understand the complexities of estate management," he began, slipping into his lecturing tone. "Your mother's arrangements were impractical. I've been managing those funds in the best interests of the family as a whole. The trust was explicitly for me," I countered. "For my education, which you refused to support, and for medical emergencies like the one I'm facing now. You knew this money existed when you told me you wouldn't help with my transplant. You knew and you lied." "I was teaching you an important lesson about self-reliance," he insisted, but his voice lacked conviction. "No," I said firmly. "You were stealing from me from Mom's legacy, and now you're going to face the consequences." "What exactly do you think you're going to do?" His tone turned threatening. "Who do you think the authorities will believe, a respected financial advisor or a struggling art teacher with a history of poor decision-making?" "They'll believe the documents," I said, "and the bank records, and possibly your own son's testimony." "Troy would never turn against me," my father said, but uncertainty had crept into his voice. Troy leaned toward the phone. "You're wrong about that, Dad, just like you've been wrong about a lot of things." There was a sharp intake of breath on the other end of the line. "Troy, you're with her after everything I've done for you. After everything you've done." Troy's voice shook with emotion. "You let me believe I was better than Skylar because I followed your path. You were going to let her die rather than use money that was rightfully hers. Money Mum left specifically to protect her from exactly this kind of situation. You don't understand what you're doing," our father warned. "If you pursue this, I'll cut you off completely. No more tuition payments, no more allowance, no more connections to build your career." I expected Troy to hesitate, to reconsider in the face of such a threat. Instead, he laughed a sound so unlike his usual careful demeanor that I stared at him in surprise. "Go ahead," he said. "I'd rather live honestly than continue benefiting from your manipulation and theft." "This isn't over," our father snapped. "You'll both regret this decision." The call ended abruptly. The three of us sat in stunned silence for a moment. Then Marcus spoke. "I think you both need a good lawyer right away. He sounds desperate, and desperate people do unpredictable things." Troy nodded, already scrolling through contacts on his phone. "I'll call Jessica. She specializes in trust law and financial crimes. She can meet us here within the hour." As Troy stepped out to make the call, I leaned back against my pillows, overwhelmed by the rapid shift in my circumstances. The transplant that had seemed impossible just hours ago was now within reach. The father I had spent a lifetime trying to please had been revealed as not just emotionally withholding, but actively criminal in his betrayal. "Are you okay?" Marcus asked gently, brushing hair from my forehead. I considered the question carefully. I'm angry. I'm hurt. I'm still processing everything. But for the first time since this all began, I also feel validated. Mom believed in me. She valued what I valued. She tried to protect me. She succeeded, Marcus said, squeezing my hand. Just not in the timeline any of us expected. Che. I smiled through fresh tears, looking down at the letter in my lap. She really did. And now I need to focus on getting well enough to honor what she wanted for me, creating beauty, teaching others to see as artists, see bringing light to dark places. For the first time in weeks, I felt a real sense of hope. Not just for my survival, but for a future where I could live according to my own values, supported by the legacy of a mother who had loved me enough to secure my freedom long after she was gone. 6 months later, I stood in front of a crowded gallery, still thin but no longer sallow, my energy slowly returning after the successful transplant surgery. The walls around me were covered with artwork mined by my students and pieces donated by local artists for the benefit show that had taken on new meaning since the discovery of my trust fund. Instead of funding my medical care, all proceeds from the show would now establish the Diane Williams Memorial Scholarship, providing financial support to young artists facing medical challenges or educational barriers. It felt like the perfect way to honor my mother's legacy and values. The road to recovery had been neither quick nor easy. Physical healing from major surgery took time, and adapting to a lifelong regimen of anti-rejection medications required patience and adjustment. But the emotional healing had been even more complex. In the weeks following the discovery of my trust fund, events had unfolded with dizzying speed. Jessica Harding Troy's law school friend had moved quickly to secure the remaining trust assets and initiate legal proceedings against my father. When confronted with the evidence of his misappropriation, he had attempted to flee the country only to be detained at Logan International Airport with a suitcase containing $200 in cash and his passport. The criminal case against him was still proceeding with charges of fraud, embezzlement, and breach of fiduciary duty. He had been released on bail, but was forbidden from leaving Massachusetts or contacting Troy or me. The last I had heard, he was living in a modest apartment, most of his assets frozen pending the outcome of the case. Troy had faced his own challenges. True to his word, our father had cut him off completely, forcing him to take a leave of absence from his MBA program, while he figured out how to finance the remainder of his education. But the change in him had been remarkable. Freed from our father's expectations and influence, he had discovered a talent for photography, something he had secretly pursued for years, but never dared to take seriously. Now he moved through the gallery camera in hand, documenting the event with an artist's eye I had never known he possessed. We weren't close yet, but we were building something new, a relationship based on mutual respect and shared experiences, rather than competition for our father's approval. Marcus appeared at my side, handsome in a suit borrowed from his brother for the occasion. "It's almost time for your speech," he reminded me gently. "How are you feeling?" "Nervous," I admitted. "But good nervous, like something important is happening." He smiled, squeezing my hand. "Something important is happening. You're reclaiming your story." Dr. Landry was there along with several nurses who had cared for me during my darkest days. Eliza, whose social media post had started the fundraising campaign, had flown in from New York, where she had recently accepted a position with a major advertising agency. Dozens of my current and former students circulated through the gallery, proudly pointing out their work to friends and family. As I stepped up to the small podium, the room quieted, all eyes turning toward me. I took a deep breath, unfolding the notes I had prepared, but finding I didn't need them. The words were already in my heart. "Thank you all for coming tonight," I began. 6 months ago, I was lying in a hospital bed facing both a medical crisis and what felt like an insurmountable financial barrier to the treatment I needed. I had been told in the cruelest possible terms that my life choices made me unworthy of help, that the path I had chosen as an artist and teacher somehow made my life less valuable. I paused, looking around at the faces of those who had rallied around me. What I discovered through that experience was exactly the opposite. The community that gathered around me, my students, my colleagues, my friends, and eventually even my brother, proved that a life measured by human connection rather than financial success is rich beyond measure. The outpouring of support I received showed me that the impact we have on others is the true currency of a life well lived. I explained briefly about the discovery of my mother's trust fund without dwelling on my father's crimes. My mother understood something fundamental that I'm only now fully grasping. She knew that true security isn't found in bank accounts or impressive job titles, but in creating a legacy of kindness, creativity, and positive impact. She protected my future not just with money, but with the wisdom to use it in service of these values. I gestured to the scholarship announcement displayed prominently near the entrance. That's why tonight, we're establishing the Diane Williams Memorial Scholarship. Every dollar raised through this show and future fundraising efforts will go towards supporting young artists facing medical or financial challenges. We'll help ensure that talent doesn't go undeveloped and that creativity isn't silenced by circumstance. The applause was heartfelt, many eyes in the room glistening with tears. As the formal portion of the evening concluded and guests returned to viewing the artwork, I found myself approached by person after person, each sharing what my story had meant to them or how my teaching had influenced their lives. One conversation particularly touched me. An older woman I didn't recognize waited patiently until most others had spoken with me. "Ms. Williams," she said, taking my hands in hers. "I worked with your mother at the elementary school. Diane was my dearest friend." "You knew my mum?" I asked, instantly attentive. She nodded, smiling sadly. "Very well. She talked about you constantly, so proud of your talent and your kind heart. When she became ill, she worried most about leaving you without protection from your father's influence. She found a way to protect me even after she was gone," I said softly. "That sounds like Diane," the woman agreed. "She believed that our choices should be guided by love, not fear, by possibility, not scarcity. I see so much of her in you, not just in your appearance, but in your spirit." After she left, I found a quiet corner to collect myself, overwhelmed by the connection to my mother that her words had provided. Marcus found me there, sitting beside me in comfortable silence until I was ready to speak. "I keep thinking about what Mom would think of all this," I said eventually. "The scholarship, the gallery show, everything that's happened with Dad and Troy." "I think she'd be incredibly proud," Marcus said. "Not just of what you've survived, but of how you've transformed it into something meaningful for others." I nodded, feeling the truth of his words. The strange thing is, I almost feel grateful for the crisis. Not the illness itself, obviously, but for what it revealed. Without it, I might never have discovered Mom's trust fund, or seen Dad's true nature so clearly. I might have spent my whole life seeking approval that was never going to come, and I might never have realized how strong you truly are, Marcus added, taking my hand. I looked around the gallery at the community that had gathered to support not just my physical healing, but the values I stood for. Every piece of art on the walls represented a connection, a moment of teaching or learning, a shared belief in the importance of creativity and expression. My father had been wrong about so many things, but perhaps most fundamentally about what constitutes true wealth. The richness of my life wasn't visible on a balance sheet, but it was undeniably present in this room full of people whose lives had intersected with mine in meaningful ways. As I prepared to rejoin the event, I thought about the journey that had brought me here, from the devastating moment in that hospital room when my father had revealed his true face, to this night of celebration and new beginnings. The path had been painful, but it had led to a place of greater authenticity and purpose. I realized that in losing what I thought was my father's love, what had actually been his conditional approval, I had gained something far more valuable: the freedom to live fully as myself, honoring my mother's legacy by creating beauty and helping others do the same. The trust fund had saved my life in the most literal sense, providing the means for the transplant I desperately needed. But my mother's true gift had been showing me through her example and her final actions that a life guided by compassion and creativity was not just valid, but vital, not just an acceptable alternative to my father's value system, but a superior one. As I moved back into the crowd, greeting friends and students, I carried this certainty with me, like a light illuminating not just my path forward, but potentially the paths of all those young artists who would benefit from the scholarship bearing my mother's name. Have you ever had to face a harsh truth about someone you loved? Did it ultimately lead to growth or freedom in your life? Share your experiences in the comments below, and don't forget to like, subscribe, and share this video if my story resonated with you. Thank you for witnessing this chapter of my journey, and remember that sometimes our greatest strength emerges precisely when we feel most broken.